G'day, Stephen Travis here. I'm in the grounds of Sydney University doing some location sketching, and I want to show you a little technique I use to help me get more accurate perspective angles when I'm on location. The starting point, of course, is always to look really carefully and to try and observe as much as we can about the angle by observation. But on top of that, I use this technique, and this is my subject. An historic stone cottage. It might have been the original gatehouse. It's called the Gardener's Lodge, so possibly the head gardener lived here. So I'll just start this drawing and then I'll show you the technique I use. I'm wanting to get the angle of the roof line here. What I do is I bring my pen down in front of me, line my pen up with the angle on the actual building that I want, and then I bring it straight down onto my page and I put a dot where I think that line is. And then I line up my pen with that dot and I then bring it straight up and double check the angle. And that looks okay. And then I double check again with the line. The angle, bring it up, and that's looking about right. And so now I continue the drawing and I can use this line as a guide for some other lines around it. However, I want to get this alignment in place and I'll do the same thing here. I will line up the points I want to line up and then I'll bring my pen down onto the paper and put a dot. Sorry about all these shadows. And then I will come up and I will check that. And that is a bit too steep. So I need to make it a bit less steep, which I'll do. And I'll just put a light guideline in place there, and now I'll use that to measure. And that's looking more accurate. And here's how this process looks from side on. Hold the pen up, I get the angle, bring the pen straight down onto the paper, make a mark, check that, bring it up again, holding the angle the same, check it against my reference, bring it back down again, check again. That's it. I can also use this method for lines that aren't perspective lines, but they're still angled lines, such as this gable end. So I bring my pen up to it, come down, put a dot, check it. That looks about right. And I draw it in place. So with these sections in place, I'm going to progress the drawing a little bit, and then we'll use the pen for a few more angles. So here's our drawing, and we're now wanting to get this roof line angle. So we'll employ the same method that we used a moment ago. So we bring our pen down and we match the angle in front of our eyes with the reference, and then we bring it straight down onto our drawing. So while it's just a little bit overcast now, we have a more even light for my drawing, and so this is how it's going. So I'll take this home and I'll just point out a few interesting things I discovered about the line work as I went. And I think that'll do for my location sketching. I've just added a few lines to indicate the stonework, and I've just added some notional shade and shadow onto the building. In fact, with the sun's position at the moment, all of these walls are in shade. But sometimes it's good to be a bit sneaky and to put some artificial shade and shadow onto our drawing to help define the form and to pop it into a more three-dimensional look. So my location sketching method for accurate perspective, one more time. I align my pen with the angle I'm wanting to capture, and then holding it steady, I bring it straight down onto my paper. I put a dot on my paper, and then I align my pen between the end point of the line and the dot, and then I bring it back up and I check the angle. If it's not quite accurate, I adjust the dot, and then I usually draw a light version of the line into place and then check that line again, and if it's all looking good, I confirm that up. It looks an incredibly clumsy method, and yet I have found it to be remarkably precise. So if you've never tried it, give it a go. If it doesn't work for you, you've got nothing to lose. When I get home, I'll just point out a few interesting things about the line work of this drawing while they're still in my head. And what a beautiful spot to sit and draw. Here's a photo of what was in front of me, it occurred to me one thing we could try to see how accurate this method enabled me to be is to put our pen here on the perspective line, having lined up the pages, and then drop it. And you can see that's a pretty good match. I did say it looks very clumsy, but I have found this to be surprisingly accurate. Let us try this line here. And again, that's pretty good. What about this one here, the angle that we started with? Yep, that's not too bad. And we'll just look at this roof line here. That's not too bad. Not quite as close as the others. I'll post this drawing onto my YouTube community page if you'd like to have a go drawing it yourself. And while this video was really about this perspective method, it wasn't about location sketching in general. And clearly I'm not set up to video while I'm drawing at the moment, so I apologize for that. But I do just want to highlight a few observations about the location sketching experience and this scene in particular, drawing directly with pen. And if I'm honest, this is the first time in 3 years that I've been location sketching because of COVID lockdowns and then because of getting COVID and getting over it. So let's have a look. The first thing I want to say is before I did this sketch, which took me just under an hour, maybe 50 minutes to draw, I did a quick 5 to 10 minute sketch just to help me get my bearings with the structure. And this is it. Now, this wasn't something that was ever going to be a drawing, but it was to help me get a sense of what some of the angles were going to be like, where I might get the proportions wrong, and it actually gave me a lot of information. It alerted me to the fact that I had to look more carefully at how this porch area attached and the proportions of this in relation to this, as well as the whole height, because there were all sorts of ways in a 6 or 7 minute sketch that these parts didn't relate to each other adequately. Doing this let me play around with some of the marks I might make, some of the lines I might use for the various textures and tones we have here with all the foliage. And it also told me to be careful here and to realize that this roof line didn't match up with this one. 5 minutes or so with a sketch that's never intended to become a proper sketch, but it can just help us to see where are the things that we may not instinctively observe correctly when we're drawing. And particularly drawing directly in pen on location, we can't erase any lines. I feel like this is an even more worthwhile investment. So what observations do I have about the line work here? Firstly, a nice loose style of drawing works well because it gives us flexibility to adjust lines slightly. I was careless with this roof line. I actually took it down to here because I made the mistake of not observing where this point was in relation to the detail I'd already drawn. Fortunately for me, there was foliage here anyway that I could use to disguise that. Now, if you look at my reference, you can see that I actually had a problem with the scale of the chimneys. And what I forgot to do was to line up these chimneys, which are on a perspective angle. And you can see that if I'd done that, I would have realized that I actually have to make this chimney a lot smaller than I have. So that's something to note for next time. It's always tricky with the detail of a scene like this. What do I do with these slate tiles? And what do I do with the lines that indicate the various large sandstone blocks? I decided to loosely indicate the stone blocks and to not make any effort to indicate the tiles. Because if we don't get these lines fairly accurate in terms of the perspective, they will look wrong and that will draw attention to them. But I did want to suggest these stone blocks with some very rough, loose lines. The size of these stone blocks gives some sense of the scale of the building and what the building looks like. But obviously I've made no effort to draw all of the stone blocks, really just suggested the effect. Now, the foliage was always going to be an important part of this scene. There are 3 different planes of connecting foliage. The center one being this hedge, this leafy plant behind the hedge, and this row of lavender bushes and some smaller things further in front of the hedge with a path between. How can we convey the difference in texture of all of these and also create a sense of separation? The challenge with lots of foliage, particularly when it overlaps, is to create enough separation between various parts and various planes so that it doesn't become this visual tangle. And I've done that both by very distinctive line work, and this was made easier by the fact that in life, these palms at the back had a very distinctive shape. This hedge we really see almost as a solid shape, and these lavender bushes also are quite distinct. And what we really notice, if we look at our reference, is that what highlights the lavender bushes is actually the negative space we see through the darker values behind it. So that's the effect I was trying to create through this cross-hatching here. Foliage, as everything in our scene, is affected by perspective. And so this hedge in a straight line is affected by perspective angles. And we need to make sure that the part of the hedge that appears on the other side of the building, which is in horizontal alignment with this section, continues the perspective pattern of this viewpoint, this eye level, these other perspective lines that we have. Again, if we look at our reference, you can see that I simplify things by removing all of this cafe furniture to give it a more domestic rather than commercial look. As soon as I drew that first little bit you saw on camera, I realized I'd drawn a larger scale than I intended. So I was pleased when this scene did actually fit on my A4 sheet of paper. And I'll certainly produce some videos that step through my way of thinking and of drawing when I'm on location. But I will need to set up with some sort of tripod so that I can film over my shoulder or something before I can do that properly. But the one thing I did find, which I had hoped would happen, was all of my drawing directly in ink from reference photos was actually great preparation for location sketching. So I hope this has encouraged you to go on location and to draw directly in pen. So don't forget, you can go to my community page, you can print off a copy of this reference and have a go yourself. And if you have any tips for location sketching, then tell us in the comment below, because I wouldn't mind a few more. I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Have fun. Bye.